question there as well. So I'd like to begin this evening with this really unique poem that I found from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And it's called Listening with Your Heart as Well as Your Ears. I speak because I know my needs. I speak with hesitation because I know not yours. My words come from my life's experiences. Your understanding comes from yours. Because of this, what I say and what you hear may not be the same. So if you will listen carefully, not only with your ears, but with your eyes and with your heart, maybe somehow we can communicate. This poem really struck me as I was thinking about this idea of listening. How many of you have ever heard statements like, "You're not listening to me. Why don't you let me finish what I'm saying? If you only let me, I'll tell you. I may as well be talking to a brick wall. You just don't understand." But that's not what I said, really. That's not what I meant. Wow, those are powerful statements that I think we've all either said or heard. So I asked Monsignor if he could just, I sent this to him ahead of time, and I asked if he could take this and just respond to it in this, wrapping it around this whole idea of listening.
Well, Suzette, that was so providential that you found that poem, because it says so much about how this attempt to communicate and understand one another is really a challenge. And we often hear, as you indicated by the questions that we all often ask, but do we really listen? And I particularly liked how the poem ended, because it focused on the eyes and the heart, and that with eyes and heart, maybe somehow we can not just hear the other person, but actually listen to them, enter into their experience, not prejudge, not interrupt, but be in a place interiorly where we are receptive to hear the other person's story or their comment or their opinion. I was thinking back of where I first began to learn how to listen. I remember my mother saying, when I was just a little boy in Redondo Beach, the reason why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth is that you're supposed to do far more listening, and she used the word listening, not hearing, than you speak. Another experience that I had as a young priest was being with a wonderful pastor, kind of one of the legends in the Archdiocese, Monsignor Jim O'Callahan. He founded the parish St. John Vianney in Hacienda Heights. And when I got there to the parish as one of his new associates, he said to me, "Jack, before you ever give anyone any advice, always first listen to their story, because it will change everything." Wow, amazing. Another experience was early on, I would find myself at a Benedictine monastery, St. Andrew's up in Valiermo. And the Benedictines, as they look at scripture, and they do what's called Lectio Divina, noticing a phrase or a word or an image that jumps out at you, they ask you, in the words of Benedict himself, to listen with the ears of your heart. So it's not just the ears up here. That would be the hearing. Oh yes, I hear you. But the listening is opening myself up and trying to put myself in the other person's shoes and respectfully, quietly listen with my heart as well as my head, without trying to give a response or formulate a response. to really enter into what they are saying to me and really ponder it, not just hear it in one ear and out the other.
In last week's Catholic conversation, Christine Garrity reminded us that St. Monica's efforts are a learning lab of love. And I just so appreciate that expression, because we are really, working hard as a community for this call to love and this call to listen, and to listen differently. So I want to take a look at some ideas and throw some questions at you, Father Jack, about this idea of listening. So how do you think that this pandemic has changed the way we're listening now?
Well, Suzette, for one thing, I believe that the pandemic, for those who have a family, and I really feel for those who are alone and have no one, maybe there's the connection through Zoom as we're doing right now with our conversation. But I've heard countless stories of people who are saying to me, oh my goodness, we're spending far more time together as a family, whether it's the spouses or the spouses and their children. And they are spending far more time doing things, just kind of being in the house, whether it's baking sourdough bread or whatever it is. And I think it's provided us, because there are fewer distractions, I might say, because even people working from home. So there's a challenge there as well as a gift. In other words, for me, going through this pandemic and being shut down for 3 months here at the House of Prayer, where we had no one coming and going, I had to listen in the silence. I had to be very aware of what was going on in my heart, my feelings, whether it was being scared that I was going to get COVID, whether it was listening to the feelings inside of me. And of course, the challenge is then to be able to share those with others. And I have this sense that because of our brothers and sisters who have been devastated by this pandemic, the 430,000 who have lost their lives and the families that have been affected by that. You just turn on the evening news and you can tell whether they are distressed because they can't visit their loved one in the hospital. They can't even talk to them and express person to person at the very last breath their love for each other, except maybe through some nurse holding the Zoom phone and FaceTiming with them. How I believe, and I've heard this from people who have lost loved ones, they still are listening and hanging on to those last words that their loved one shared with them through FaceTime before they died. And their eyes would well up with tears because they didn't just hear it, they were listening, and it impacted them powerfully.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. That's really really beautiful. I have a cousin who's my godfather is her dad, and he passed away, and she shared a picture of her talking to him from the iPad, and it's just it was so beautiful. I mean, you could see the looks on their faces and how important that was for them.
There's the eyes and the hearts, the eyes and the hearts.
Yes, it was just beautiful. I was thinking about what you were saying about being in your space and having to listen differently. And when the pandemic started, there were 6 adults in my house, all living and working now at home. And so for us, it was a whole new way of listening for sure. I had to often step out or go to my room, which was really only the sacred space that I had, kind of to just gather myself, so that I could listen to myself first before I actually went out and listened to them. It was because there was just so much activity going on in the kitchen and people having to respect people's spaces for work. And it was just an interesting learning experience for sure.
Suzette, I just want to congratulate you on that, because that is a very important dimension of listening to others. You said it so beautifully. I had to go into my room and listen to myself. In other words, I have to go and take a deep breath, because I know I'm going to go out there and maybe there's going to be an onslaught of different things coming at me. Am I going to be able to really listen? I have to prepare myself in many situations to really not just hear, but listen. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, sometimes, you just don't know. So I appreciate that. One of the things, though, that I think sometimes every once in a while would come up was this idea of trying to prove that you were right in the conversation. And so is it about winning? What was it about? And so I'm wondering what you think about sometimes what happens in relationships or situations where it just goes back and forth because someone feels like they have to either A, have the last word or win in the conversation.
Well, that's, I think, especially kind of piggybacking on last week's conversation and what we've been through as a country, not just with the pandemic, but with the elections and all that, that this is probably more the case for most people than we can even imagine. And I always, because I'm trying to follow, I mean, we're talking about this whole topic of listening as a way of loving. If you look at Jesus in the Gospels, how he interacted with people, the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery, he paused, he listened. He actually asked a lot of questions. He never just imposed answers. In fact, it's interesting that I believe Jesus asked something like 103 questions in the four Gospels, and he only answered 3 of them, because he respected the fact that the answer would be in the other person, like John 1:35 and following. What are you looking for? Or when Bartimaeus, the blind man, jumped up, what do you want me to do for you? Then Pope Francis, especially in his recent encyclical on social friendship, huge document, and talking even about Let Us Dream, the book that you kind of referred to last week in the conversation. It's this whole idea about spreading God's love. And as you said, we're trying to be, I forget the words you used there at St. Monica's, a laboratory for helping people grow in love for others. Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that we are loved by God without ever having to do anything. He loved us into existence. And I really believe that kind of using my clue from the gospel, Pope Francis, and what we're about as disciples of Jesus, I always, when I'm in a conversation, I want to value and focus on safeguarding the relationship, whatever it is, and not giving in to this, whether I'm right or you're right, or we've got to prove that I'm right. To me, I don't want that to be the focus. And I think Pope Francis really underlines that so powerfully, that when we enter into dialogue with someone, we should always start with a great respect for their dignity and the fact that they're different and they have different experiences than we have, and we need to celebrate that and not focus on the differences between us, but on what unites us. So, long-winded answer or comment, I want to always focus on safeguarding and honoring the relationship rather than trying to win an argument.
So let's say that the other person just starts to be mean and hateful and toxic. What do you recommend? Because that happens. What do you recommend? Do you walk away? Do you say stop? I mean, what do you recommend?
Well, Suzette, that's always, every case is different. And I've only been in that situation a few times, and I would defer back to you and others who are maybe listening in on this conversation. But many times, and it's so much of it is about tone of voice, it's about the eye contact. And I just say something like, listen, I don't want this to come in between our relationship. And so maybe we just need to change the topic if you don't mind.
Mm.
And sometimes I've actually found that very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I've also been in situations where, and I'm sure most of us have, where you have people who are throwing out opinions and comments that are you just can't even relate to, and you realize you cannot really have a conversation about that topic. It's like the old saying when they say, when you get together, don't ever talk about religion or politics.
Right.
Well, sometimes it's just better not to go there and to realize that they have their opinion, I have my opinion, and I don't need to fix them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's you see, in spiritual direction, which is a very unique type of conversation and listening, I spend, as I indicated, more time listening than talking, because I want to provide a sacred space for the other person to literally tell their story. I want to be a guest at their table of life. That means that I don't interrupt. I let them, sometimes I'll sit for 40 minutes of the hour and listen to this stream of what's been going on in their parish and in their ministry and what's going on inside of them. And then I will maybe ask a question gently, or I will notice things that jumped out at me, because God is the director. I'm not the director. I prefer actually the term spiritual companionship, because you're not putting a collar around somebody and dragging them somewhere. You respect the God in them and the mystery in them. Every person is different. And can we respect the mystery of their experience, their family of origin experience, all their growing up experiences, and realize that in a way, I need to take my sandals off like Moses before the burning bush, because here is a very unique brother or sister made in the image of God that I'm privileged to be with and sit with and have a conversation with. And I want to listen to them and respect their experience and their story.
That is so beautiful. Just the idea of entering into the space of being with someone at table, hearing their life, just, gosh, could you imagine if everyone could do that? Our world would be so different, right?
Wouldn't it? Exactly, Suzette. Like, for instance, I just think it's, all of us have had the experience, haven't we? Where we sit and listen to a really good friend. You go out with one of your girlfriends, or I go out with a priest friend, or I go to a family, and you sit there and you listen to them and you listen to them. And at the end they say, and you've hardly said anything, and at the end they say, you have no idea how much you've helped me. And I go, I didn't do anything. All I did was create a sacred space for them to honestly share what was in their heart and in their mind.
Yes, I love that. That's really lovely. I also like the idea. I think it was Dale, when we were having a conversation as we were preparing for this, he talked about how his mom would always say, well, you need to sit in their shoes. You need to walk in their shoes for the day, and I think that's so important. Took me a long time to learn that, what that really meant. It's easy to consider what their life might be like, another's life might be like, but if you actually stopped and thought about, the pain or the angst that they're feeling or the struggles or all of the stuff that's happening, it changes the way you react and respond to people. And I think that's really important.
Suzette, I'll just throw this out. I've seen this movie at least 10 times. Forrest Gump. Everybody should rent that movie because Forrest Gump, as kind of nerdy and crazy as Tom Hanks was, he was able to do exactly what you just said. To kind of say, okay, these people, I don't know, the person in front of me who just gave me the finger on the freeway, I don't know what, this is probably not about that at all. It's not about what it's about. He's probably maybe overstressed at work and he's got all these issues. Maybe something's happened, somebody's sick in the family with COVID or something. And Forrest Gump was able to understand that we don't know the burdens that people carry.
Mhm.
I mean, someone said recently to me, be kind to everyone because everyone is dealing with some struggle or burden. And you may never know what it is. They're not going to tell you. And then Forrest Gump, I think one of the other things that he saw the possibility in people. Look at how Jesus saw the possibility in this crazy fisherman by the name of Peter, who was always putting his foot in his mouth. He could never get the message. He was full of his ego. He denied that he ever knew Jesus, but Jesus never gave up on him. He saw the possibilities. So there's a real, I'm just affirming, Suzette, what you just said, because that was really beautiful.
Thanks. So I was thinking about, when I work with families, one of the things I try to encourage families is to, when they pray together or they're having conversation about something that's really important, that they actually, as they're talking back and forth, learn this idea of mirroring or repeating or restating. Um, and what do you think about that?
Oh, I think it's very important, but I think the issue is, and everybody's going to be different. I think it's how we do that that's important because, there's the old standard of kind of the therapeutic line is what I hear you saying is,
Oh, right. Mhm.
and that can get old real fast and it can seem a little condescending.
Mhm.
So, for instance, and again, I'm no expert in this at all. I'm just simply a resource who does a lot of listening, and I probably don't do it that well myself. But, like, for instance, in what I just said a little while ago about listening to someone share their story in a conversation, and then I will go back after they're finished. I do not interrupt. I'll go back and pull out pieces that struck me. And it's always been, and this is not my credit, I think this is the Holy Spirit. They'll always say, wow, or I'll ask them, which of all these things that you've shared with me in terms of spiritual companionship seems to burden you the most or seem to be the most important to you? So in a way, you're mirroring it, but not by what I heard you say. Or sometimes, of course, you can be hearing, you can actually ask them questions that might draw them out a little bit. But I think we have to be a little careful because some people are not ready to answer the questions. And so we have to be very sensitive to the timing. Like sometimes in spiritual direction or spiritual companionship, I'll start with someone. And when I was the spiritual director at St. John's Seminary for 18 years, it would take sometimes 2 years of meeting every 3 weeks or 4 weeks with the seminarian when we would finally go deeper. And but I needed to help this other person build up a rapport of trust where they could trust me enough that finally, without my pushing it, they could share something that was very sacred to them, very private and very scary.
Do you think that, I think one of the things that I think about is when you start to ask questions, um, there's this sometimes reaction that could be where they feel a sense of being challenged. Um, and you kind of alluded to that. Can you speak on that maybe a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being, again, remember this whole thing is about creating an atmosphere, at least from my understanding, of hospitality, where I am going to get out of the way. And so I want to be in the poem that you read at the beginning, that whole thing about with your eyes and with your heart, maybe somehow we can communicate. The eye contact, if I feel like if I'm giving off the impression that I'm prodding or I'm invading their privacy, I have to be very careful about that. And I would have to be in a situation, a live situation where I kind of like could kind of sense the mood of the other person and whether they were, by their body language, were feeling threatened or challenged. Or, I mean, I've actually had people all of a sudden close their arms like this and look down, and then I know that maybe I've struck a nerve, and so I will not push it. But then if it's important not to be afraid of silence either. A couple of times there's been huge, maybe even 3 or 4 minutes of silence, and then suddenly the other person will speak. So we need to be comfortable with silence too in our listening. I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, it does. It does. That silence piece is huge. And I have to tell you, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm working on that because I've noticed that the silence, I know that the silence is the space where the Holy Spirit really gives, we give the Holy Spirit room to just kind of sit with us. But sometimes it's uncomfortable and I break it. And then I realize that I did it and it's too late. So
yeah, but Suzette, don't get down on yourself, because the very fact that you, by hindsight, realize that you broke it, then the next time you'll be okay, the silence is okay. Because I've actually been in conversations where right after we begin, literally the other person sits there, we sit there for 20 minutes in absolute silence. And then suddenly the person will begin to talk. Because somehow our prayer experience at the beginning of the conversation, which is not just saying a prayer, but really providing ample quiet for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, be still and know that I'm God and that God's with us. And then I guess and then the person actually told me in one situation, I was so struck by that I was just in a totally different place, and I really felt the presence of God within me, and I could not speak. And thank you for not saying anything.
Wow. I got to work on that. I probably need to work on my own silence time.
Like, let me tell you this, Suzette. I one time was at St. Andrews in Pasadena, and I'd go sometimes 4 or 5 times a day to Huntington Memorial Hospital, mainly to the neonatal care unit. And many times you would go in these tragic situations of the child born dead, or the parents, in this one situation, and I used to think I had to talk. This one situation, I went in there and it was I'm getting tears in my eyes just thinking about it. There was the mother in the bed holding the body of her infant, and the husband on the bed with her, and they're sobbing. Well, there was a conversation, there was an encounter that was wordless. And I had this absolute conviction, Jack, don't open your mouth. I stood there for maybe a half hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And I remember I put my hand on his shoulder, and I gave him my contact information. I did the graveside, but about 6 months later, he came with a bottle of wine to the rectory, and he wanted to thank me, and he said, I just want to tell you, Father Jack, if you would have opened your mouth when you came into the hospital room, I think I would have slugged you, because My wife and I were so angry at God. We were angry beyond words. And you didn't say a thing. And he said, thank you.
Wow. That's so beautiful. What a testimony too.
Well, I learned a lot about that.
Yeah.
That's not always the way
No, that's
I
true.
put my foot in my mouth too all the time.
The Holy Spirit was at work for sure.
Yeah.
Father Jack, we have some questions.
Okay.
I want to get to them. Dale, I think you wanted to have someone come on live. Is that correct?
No, but I'll ask a question.
Okay.
So one of our listeners on Facebook Live is talking about the importance of art and the arts in helping people to experience the ability to express themselves. And so she says that art changed them. Art changed people that have been in deep depression. Art changed people that have had huge psychological issues. And the schools have cut the arts, so people don't have that experience that in their bandwidth. And so she's just making a comment that art therapy can change the way people express themselves.
Beautiful. Oh, I concur. Art, even in terms of music, the fine arts, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure.
Thanks, Dale. I see that Tim has a question, and he says, how can I listen from the heart with others in every part of my life?
Well, let me just throw some suggestions out. First of all, I mentioned earlier that we're in this conversation as men and women who are attempting to be faithful disciples of Jesus Christ and to love. And I want to piggyback again, Suzette, on how you removed yourself and went into your room to listen to yourself. Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to, sometimes we're so caught up in our workplace or whatever. That's where it's so important to have contemplative moments in our lives, to be still and know God. Like, for instance, you at St. Monica's are so blessed to have James Finley as very much a vibrant part of your faith community. And I think especially during Lent, he leads guided meditations. And, as we're praying for Father David Ayotte, I've known him for 40 years and a dear friend, and I'm with him as he's going through what he's going through right now. But the fact that he has the whole staff going through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, which requires taking an hour or whatever it is every day and listening to scripture and listening in the silence, can really help Tim and all of us in our everyday lives to be better listeners to others. And sometimes, now, most of the experiences that I've shared on this conversation have been rather focused, specific, programmed conversations. But when you're dealing with people just in the give and take of everyday life, maybe I am going to hear and not listen because so much is coming at me that I need to choose what I'm going to listen to. Another thing I would say to Tim is this, as a final comment. The spiritual exercise of St. Ignatius, one of the key gifts that Ignatius of Loyola gave us was what is called the examen of consciousness at the end of the day. Not an examination of conscience of where I did right and where I did wrong, but as I look back over the day, kind of like Suzette, what you did when you said, I'm learning by making the mistake and then thinking, oh gosh, I shouldn't have done that. Looking back over the day to where was I conscious of God in my life, loving me or challenging me? And usually for me, it centers around my interactions with people in ministry, for Dale or those listening in their places of work and their family interactions, so that by hindsight, I'm listening with the ear of my heart to how God has touched me throughout the day. Hindsight is usually 20/20 anyway. So just a few suggestions there. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's great. Thank you. We have another question from Facebook, and I see it's from my sister. And she asks, how do you work with your own tone and how do you shift it? And in our family, we all have tone. And our kids will tell you, the nieces and nephews will tell you that all of the women have a tone. And it's so interesting that Lynette brings that up because it is something I think all of us have had to work on because we don't even know that we have it. It just is it's just the way we respond. I think we're strong women, and when we talk with this, we're with conviction, and this is we're tough. So we've all had to learn how to take that and shift it and move it to a calmer side. But for people who don't realize that they have this tone, how do you respond to that?
Well, I guess if you're a really good friend, you could say, I hope you don't mind me telling you this, but sometimes I feel that sometimes, you come on really strong or whatever. That'd be a good friend. But you're so right. What is your sister's first name?
Lynette.
Lynette, it's good to have you on. Suzette and Lynette, that's good. Tone of voice is so utterly important. Like when I use the example of in some kind of a confrontational conversation, where I would say, and again, it's the tone of voice, like, let's change the topic. Well, that's one tone. The other tone would be, would you mind if we changed the topic and move on to something else? So all that's important. It's just like eye contact is so important in a conversation. Mm-hmm. So the tone, yes, we all need to work on that because that's why it's so important to have Sabbath time in your life. It's so important to be balanced out, to have the extroverted experiences and the introverted experiences, because when we don't, we're going to end up reacting to people rather than responding. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And our whole goal, as Pope Francis reminds us, is not to impose, but to propose. I like that. Not impose, but propose. Yeah.
Yes, I think, I pray often for responding as opposed to reacting. Because of my tone, it tends to come across as reactive. So I'm learning and have learned kind of different ways I've literally have stopped myself in because I've caught it in mid conversation, catch it, and just like, okay, shift, just do a little shift. But it's on so many levels. There's so much work we have to do on ourselves.
Exactly. And we need other people who are close to us to be able to mirror some of, and not take it, as something bad when, say, a brother or a sister or a really good friend says, Jack, sometimes you come across this way. Did you know that? And again, it's the tone of voice, but it's, how you meet these people. I wish I could think of, what was Fran's name there at St. Monica's, who was Eucharistic minister?
Fran.
Oh my goodness. She's one of those people. Or I'm just thinking of, there's a couple of the people in my life, they're just so, and they actually do what you just suggested. They kind of pause. Some people will say, before you respond, use something like a 10-second interval. You can actually even say, could I think about that for a minute? Or I've actually, in some situations, removed myself from the room when I feel the heat is going up in the room. And I've often say, would you excuse me because I need to use the restroom? Well, I'm going to use the restroom to go in and take some deep breaths and just kind of say, let me remind myself what this is about and go back in. And in my absenting myself, like I remember a confrontation I had with a doctor in a parish I was at, and he was coming in with his fiance, to arrange a marriage. And I think I had gone to the hospital, Huntington Memorial, on a sick call, neonatal care unit. I came back and I was 15 minutes late. And this doctor blew up at me. He said, where were you? We were here right on time. And I just almost lost it, because how many times I've sat in a doctor's office and had to wait for 3 hours. So I went, I said, you're not going to like this, but I need to excuse myself. And he blew up, another blow. So I left. And I think in the time I left, his intended said to him, honey, calm down, calm down. I went back in about 5 minutes. He had calmed down. And I said to him, with a tone of voice that was not angry, again, this was the Spirit. I'm no great shakes, but somehow God is always there. I said to him, doctor, I had to laugh when you got upset at me, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a doctor and had to wait far more than 15 minutes for an appointment. And he laughed too, but it was that kind of, anyway.
Yeah, it took a little bit. Yeah, I love it.
We have more questions?
We do. Let's see. Carmen, were you going to ask your question live? Dale? Okay, I'll read it. She says, sometimes a person just wants to be listened to with no feedback or comment. Depending on the comfort level and sense of safety, aka setting up a safe place, it's okay to ask, okay, so do you want me to just listen to, or should I just listen, or do you want feedback? Listening is a learned skill. It's taught and needs practice. I find when I'm in a listening mode, it is important for me to clear my own head and breathe and relax. Silence is very powerful. I resonated when you said no need to fix anyone.
Well, I would just concur with her that I love the way she said that. In other words, as I said in that example about how we all have that experience of having someone just speak, talk, and at the end they say how grateful they are because we simply listened with reverence. And I think that experience underlines for me, especially in family dynamics, how difficult it is to really listen to one another. Because I think in family settings, at least when I was growing up, we kind of take one another for granted. And Carmen's comments and the silence, and just sometimes I'll just say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. That was very sacred. And then I'll pause. And then that gives them the opportunity to maybe ask, well, what did you think? Or, something else that they might want to ask. But I just leave the silence as giving them the space, if they want to ask a question, to be able to do that.
You just said something that I think is like really powerful that we don't think about, is that when we're actually in conversation, that the sacredness that's around that is really important. And we don't even think about it. We just start shooting at the mouth, if you will, and just talking, but not thinking about, like, this is a moment of two beautiful people together in conversation that should be wrapped around in sacredness. I have to remember that. That's something that I need to remember when I'm in conversation. I don't have I mean, rarely, casual conversation is different than, I feel like I'm always in important conversation. Just an interesting thought.
Yeah, and like you, Suzette, I'm always in usually important conversations when I'm sitting with a priest, and I just feel so humbled. I go, who am I? When the Cardinal asked me to come here in 2005, I said, what do you need? You've got a little bit, we're going to do this. And he says, well, I want you to go there because I want you to go with your heart and not your head. And here's a little piece that I just want to share that I think would be very helpful. I want to be a person, as I strive to be a good disciple of Jesus Christ, and to be very much involved in this helping our world to heal in the midst of all the divisions and all that we've been through, and to be a loving person. I want to meet people with the book of love, not the book of the law. Mm-hmm. Because I think as a church institution, many times we have become more like some of the Pharisees in the Gospels rather than like Jesus. Mm-hmm. We're caught up in doctrine and moral teaching, which it has its place. Mm-hmm. But the focus of what we're about is the person of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Encountering him and being his disciples in the world. I was so struck, I went by Holy Grounds and got one of those Christmas candles. I snuck in there. Good. And I did you can tell your wonderful pastor, Lola Lloyd, that I gave $20 for that candle because I wanted to contribute to St. Monica's, because I live stream you almost every Sunday. Oh, nice. Even though I have Mass in the parish I help out at, because I'm so enriched by what you do there. But we're called to be a light in the darkness. Mm. And I think by listening, by slowing down, that's one of the things when you asked the question, Suzette, about how has the pandemic helped us hopefully listen, I think it has slowed us down. I think God has been screaming at us this year. Mm-hmm. Are we listening to God and what God's saying in the midst of what we're going through? I think he's screaming at us to heal the divisions, to stop being about who's right and who's wrong, and it's us against them, to begin to see that we're friends, not enemies, even when we disagree with one another. Can we disagree without being disagreeable? Things like that. I mean, and he's basically telling us to slow down. I remember those first months. Remember the freeways? Oh my gosh. People were giving thousands of tickets for people driving 100 miles more an hour. Slowing us down so we can listen, so we can be more present.
Yeah.
Del, I have a great passion about all this.
I love it. We have another question, and I think we spoke to some of it, but I'm gonna say the question out loud. How to stay in a loving place with individuals who tend to dominate discussions, not giving opportunity for others to speak.
Wow. That's why sometimes when I have a person-to-person speech or presentation, I don't have questions from the floor. I'm available for questions afterwards because sometimes it can get derailed. I've done this. Sometimes one just has to say, when you're calling on different people or whatever, we just say, I think we'd all benefit from hearing maybe what others in the room think, or so. And again, it's Suzette, it's the tone of voice. Would you sit down? No. So it's kind of like, and these people mean well, but they get carried away with their own agenda. And I think we need to be sensitive to that.
Yep.
Do you have any suggestions on that, Suzette, that's worked for you?
No, I think I've learned to use body language, but like you, it's more when I'm in a group and maybe I'm presenting or something. And so my body language is what helps to shift the domination. That's, but if it's just a one-on-one, that's really hard. It's really
Right.
hard to do. You know.
Well, I've had that experience where someone just goes on and on and on and on and on. And then I just let them. I remember one time I had this phone conversation. Somebody was really, really angry at me. And when I was first ordained, I would interrupt them and I'd say, but you don't understand. And, this is whatever, and I'd So finally, I think it was that famous guy that used to teach at USC. His name was Leo Buscaglia. He wrote a number of books about.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he said, when people do that, just let them talk. So she had all these issues with the church, but she was dumping it on me. Well, I learned a long time ago, don't take it personally. They're angry at the church institution, whatever.
Yeah.
So she went on and on and on, 4-letter words and on, and, blah, blah, blah. So she went on and on, and finally, I didn't say a thing. So she says, are you there? And that deflated the whole balloon. I said, oh, yes, I'm here. I'm listening to you. And it so discombobulated her that the whole temperature went down. It was amazing.
I guess, yeah, there's definitely tools for figuring all that out for sure.
And we all learn our own way. Like you said, with your body language, Suzette, you can communicate a lot by your body language.
Yeah. And I think in family structures, people learn, they know that, oh, now's not a good time to talk to mom, or, I'll come back when, right? So we all learn how to take the temperature, of the room, if you will. Finding what's right, what feels safe.
And Suzette, taking the temperature and listening also involves being aware of the other person's body language. It's not just the ear and the heart. It's what are they communicating by their body language? Mm-hmm. And listening to that without judging it. But you can pick up the clues very easily about where somebody's at.
Yeah, most definitely. Yes.
And respecting it. A lot of people right now are going through very, very difficult times. And that's where we have to pray ourselves and take those times to be still and to go into our room like you did. That still is so powerful, to back away and then come back, because otherwise we are going to react. I think we're all under more stress than we realize. Mm-hmm. I think this ongoing pandemic has been very fatiguing. And on top of that, the whole election cycle and all we've been through politically, and the economic struggle people are going through, and the racial inequality. I mean, there's just so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot.
And this is where we're called to put our trust more and more in God and do what we can gently and with great respect and reverence to build bridges with one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important. And and I mentioned this already, but I'm really seeing it, and you alluded to it as well, is that just that time for prayer and listening to God, and how important that is.
Or putting on quiet music. Like I love KUSC.
So do
it
we.
calms me down. I just let the music carry me, and it takes me from my head to my heart, and I listen, and it calms me down. Like when I'm driving on the freeway, I want to find out where the traffic issues are, so KNX. But then as soon as I do that, then I go into music, and I can feel my whole body. So then when I get where I'm going and have to interact, say, with a hospital call or some other situation, I'm much more at peace.
Nice.
It's pouring rain here.
Yeah.
The atmospheric river has,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can hear it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I think I'm going to just do a quick peek on Facebook, but I think that we we have answered our questions. I think that's it. And my sisters are teasing me on Facebook. That's
Oh, you have
okay.
several sisters, huh?
I do. One of them responded, LOL, we can't help it, in regards to our tone. Yeah, it's funny. It's cute. Let's see. No questions on Vimeo or YouTube either. So I think we're good. This is great. Oh wait, let me look at the Q&A. I see a Q&A. Oh, someone said I love KUSC. Monsignor.
Oh, good.
She said anti-road rage.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's around 4:30 in the afternoon or whatever it is. And it's just so soothing.
It is. Thanks, Bonnie.
Then I have a few books that I would recommend.
Okay.
And one is, I don't know if you can see this, but it's Arthur Brooks' Love Your Enemies. This is a great, great book to kind of give more detail for those who have a hard time. You see, we live right now, I think some of the temperature's gone down, but we live kind of in a culture of contempt right now. Everybody has got their camps, even in the church sometimes. And this book is so helpful. In the back of it, the 5 rules of engaging, it's just a masterpiece of how to deal with people who are on different sides of an issue than we are. I found it just remarkable.
Okay.
And of course, the Let Us Dream by Pope Francis that you already know about, The Path to a Better Future. And the last one, because of, who was it that mentioned the whole thing about art? I think Dale.
Yeah, it was a woman on Facebook.
Well, here is a book that I just came across by a wonderful, I am mesmerized by this guy. His name is Mikado Fujimura. He is an artist, and this is his latest book, Art and Faith. And reading the book calmed me down. It's that calming thing. And whoever asked that question or made the comment, I also believe that poems calm me down. Mary Oliver.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Let's see.
Like for instance, her poem Praying, it doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot or a few small stones. Just pay attention. Hatch a few words together. They don't need to be elaborate, because this is a doorway into thanks and into a silence in which another voice may speak. Listening to God in the silence enables us to listen to the God who is in each and every one of our brothers and sisters in the human family. Wow.
Amen.
Anyway.
Love it.
I'm so excited. Anyway.
I love it. Those are great. So I thought we could just close our evening tonight reading that poem again as a reminder.
Yes. Oh, what a great poem. Please, and you read it so well, Suzette.
So it is called Listening with Your Heart as Well as Your Ears. I speak because I know my needs. I speak with hesitation because I know not yours. My words come from my life experiences. Your understanding comes from yours. Because of this, what I say and what you hear may not be the same. So if you will listen carefully, not only with your ears, but with your eyes and with your heart, maybe somehow we can communicate. And I'll say amen.
Amen to that. Now that if we can just live that poem.
Yes.
I just want to thank you for this wonderful, glorious opportunity to be with whoever is joining in on the conversation. And once again, thank God for St. Monica's. It is such a bright light to so many people throughout the world. I was struck a couple of Sundays ago, Monsignor Lloyd did the dismissal for the children, and the child who led the dismissal was in Denmark,
Yes.
and he held the Bible up and he walked out the front door in the snow.
Yes.
And I said, wow.
Yes, it is.
Keep up the good work. And if I could just ask those of you who are chiming in, if you would be prayer partners in praying for the spiritual renewal of all of us, but especially priests and bishops. This is a very difficult time, and deacons, and men and women in ministry like all of you. I would really appreciate that. That's what the House of Prayer is for, and it's just it's a hidden treasure here. So may the Word of God come down on us like the rain is falling down on us right now. Have its effect in our hearts so we can be better listeners.
Amen. Amen.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
God
so much,
bless.
Monsignor. Take care.
welcome.
Thank you. Stay
Thank
on
you.
for a minute while we exit out. And just real quick, someone was asking for the poem. It's called Listening with Your Heart as Well as Your Ears. And I found it from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So it was on their, I don't know if it was on a website or I just happened to come across it. So I hope that helps.
It's a masterpiece.
It's beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you everyone for being with us. Thank you for sharing your
Suzette,
evening with us.
Mariel, and Dale. I really appreciate it. We'll be in touch. God bless.
We'll see you next Thursday for our next Catholic conversation.
Good. And be careful in the rain.
Amen.